All right, we're gonna start the meeting. Gonna, if we could, it's about just before 10 o'clock, and we close that door. We can leave the Miss Pamela. We can leave that one cracked in the back. If you leave that one open, if it gets too loud, we'll turn it. We'll shut it. But yes, that one, please. Thank you. Um, First, I would like to welcome everyone to our study committee on property tax assessment and valuation, and then also the process. We're looking at property tax reform is I guess the subject area that we'll be focusing on. So I want to welcome everyone here today, and I appreciate you taking the time out in the middle of the week to come into the Capitol and be with us. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for helping us out. Trey, thank you for being on the committee. Brian, thank you for also helping out and filling in for Lynn. I know she's out this week, so we appreciate that. Judge O'Neill, thank you for being here. We are honored to have you here as a former mentor of mine in the House. We're just grateful to see you here. Commissioner Dempsey, thank you for also being here and joining us. It was nice to talk to your wife yesterday as I was up in Calhoun, running through the West North Georgia mountains. Beautiful country. I got to see a sunrise yesterday morning that was exquisite. So, beautiful country of Georgia. Representative Carson, thank you for being here this morning. I know you've been rushing around a lot this summer, so we're happy to have you. Ms. Beskin, thank you for joining us as well. And Brian, thank you for your service to the committee. We have an outstanding committee here that the Speaker has appointed. So we are commissioned by the Speaker of the House. And as you all know, any tax legislation or reform originates in the House of Representatives in the Georgia General Assembly. And so as a constitutional matter, this is where it begins, and this is as it should. And so the import of the Speaker's creation of this study committee and the individuals that he has appointed to this committee, I think speak volumes of what we're charged to do. This is important. It is important to review every aspect of our tax code on a periodic basis, to update it as needed, to evaluate how effective, efficient that process is, and how and the fairness of that process, the transparency of that process. So I think that is in part the impetus of this committee, is to take that periodic review. I also will say that Chairman Jay Powell, I don't serve on the Ways and Means Committee. And so I was honored and curious to find out why Chairman Powell wanted me to carry that resolution and to initiate the study committee. And I think the summation of it is that that he too thought it was time to review. I think that there was a taxpayer's bill of rights that was considered not quite a decade ago, but just about, and that was pushed by Chip Rogers. So I think it's timely that we revisit the issue, and I'm grateful to Chairman Powell for the opportunity to serve on this committee and get to know my colleagues in the context of Ways and Means better. And Ms. Gardner, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So we have as you can tell, we have a very good and strong committee here, and it's certainly an honor to serve with you all. The subject area that I'd like to do is, obviously we know what we're going to talk about, but I wanted to try to break down and get some feedback from the committee. So first off, as far as the process goes, the two main areas of emphasis that I see for the committee is first on the valuation process. How do we value and assess properties real property in the state of Georgia? What does that process entail? What are the criteria that we use? Is there any need to modernize the approach? Is there a need to reevaluate the statutory criteria? Do we also need to take an examination and look at what rules and regulations DOR has put out, including the Georgia Assessment Manual that is promulgated by the Department of Revenue? so that's a fairly deep dive into the question of assessments. Then the second area that I think we need to touch on is the appeal process. How is it that once the assessment is made, how is it that the taxpayers have an opportunity to voice their concerns regarding that assessed value? What are their rights and what are their remedies? And what is that, and how effective is the process that we currently have? What adjustments, if any, do we need to make to that process to better facilitate transparency, better facilitate a honest brokered assessment of property values, and also to try to, in a way, minimize litigation where we can. So those are the two subject areas that I think that are important. I wish we had time to touch on property tax exemptions, but I think that that's a huge elephant to try to tackle, and that probably is going to be something we will do maybe next summer, next fall. But those are the two areas of focus. Now, those are the areas that I'm intimating to you are important. Are there any suggestions in either one of those contexts that you would like to raise with the committee now as members, so that I can add that to my mental notes of what we should cover in our next meetings? Any comments from committee members? Yes.
Are you streaming this, or can I just?
We are streaming it. Thank you, Representative Carson.
I just wanted to. Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for stepping up. It sounds like you were voluntold, so I appreciate you being voluntold. I know what that's like with Jane. The one thing I wanted to mention is particularly with the former majority leader here. Thank you, Larry, for being here. I have heard from a number of people in my industry with regard to affordable housing and various other entities that we can state whatever we want in statute. The Department of Revenue can write whatever regulations they want. Assessment boards of assessors are going to operate very independently with little or no accountability to state statute, regulation, particularly when you get into assessing property value, which is more art than it is methodical or what have you. So I would not expect an answer, definitely not a definitive answer to this, but one of my biggest concerns is what holds those boards of assessors accountable in regard to assessing value. And I don't know the answer to that, but maybe as a part of this committee, the study committee will find that answer or find a different approach or what have you. I've literally heard from people to say, you know what, this is in law, DOR regs say this, but this is the way it's going to be, and that's the end of it. And that's what some county boards are saying. Mm-hmm. So I throw that out there and hope we can work on that.
It's a good question. So what is the accountability process for boards of assessors and ensuring that they are applying and enforcing state law as is written versus whatever whims that may be influencing them? Good. Any other comments, thoughts? Yes, Ms. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The City of Atlanta and Fulton County, as you know, are extremely interested in what will transpire from this committee, and I'm glad that Representative Carson brought up affordable housing. So figuring out a way for us to balance in Atlanta, stabilizing the neighborhoods that suddenly become hot and the assessments go up and the people who've been there for years struggle to stay in their homes. So that's certainly one important issue. The other thing that you mentioned, the exemptions, is a huge issue in Fulton County, and they've just asked me to sit in on a study that they're going to do to actually look at all those exemptions. So a year from now might be the right time for us to take a look at that, and I think that's going to be really important. So thank you for mentioning that. I wish we could make it happen tomorrow so we would all understand, but I think that it's going to take a while for them to figure out where they are and what they would like to do to go forward. So thank you.
Good. Very good. Other comments? Okay, well, good. I appreciate the feedback very much, and so we'll continue that kind of dialogue. I think that my intention is to have a very open conversation about all these issues. We are doing that with public streaming, and to the members of the public, whether you've been on the right end or wrong end of tax assessments and the appeal process. I think it's important that you try to reach out and contact us with information that you think is relevant. That can be done by contacting me at andy.welch@house.ga.gov through email. And then we will try to take that information into consideration as you submit that information to me. The committee members, if you have anecdotal or other information from individuals in your various areas in your constituencies or in your work-related areas, please feel free to bring that information forward. But I'd like for this to be conversational amongst the committee members and the public. In the next series of meetings, what I would propose that we do as a committee is that we first focus on one of those two subject areas and spend at least one full committee day or hearing on that area. So if we want to tackle the appeal process first or the valuation process, the assessment process, then let's set that up for our next meeting. I'd like to also get some dates set for you so we schedule at least the next 3 meetings if we can, a minimum of 2, and I'd like to delve into each of those subject areas in detail in those next couple of meetings. I anticipate that we'll spend 2 meetings hearing the issues relative to those 2 subject areas, and then a following meeting, more of a kind of a working meeting to work through what changes, reforms that we're seeing should probably be applied. And then the final meeting to summarize all of that and put it into a final document. So I do anticipate we'll probably use all 5 of our allotted meetings. And so I do want to get with you on a schedule and see what timeframes will work with you. So the way that will be helpful is that I'll have Brian send out an email, or Ms. Pamela will send out an email to everyone with some proposed dates, and you'll check your calendars to let me know if those work for the majority. And then we'll proceed from there. Is that okay? Which subject area would the committee prefer to tackle first out of those 2 items, so that we'll go ahead and let the public know that that's the one we're going to be taking up first, and we'll take in public testimony and hearing information at that time. Is there a preference? Judge. Okay. Just so that
To analyze the appeal process, I think we'd have to have a pretty comprehensive understanding of valuation, because that's
Here, here.
going to be the predicate of most appeals anyway.
I agree.
All right, I agree too. All right, so with that, so our next meeting will be on the assessment and valuation process. And so we'll take a deep dive into that. I provided with the letter that I sent out last week, you have a copy of the regulations that deal with the Georgia appraisal manual. Also, there's some information in there about the assessment process, but I think we'll need to get more. So those that are interested in the evaluation and assessment process and providing information to the committee on that, that will be the topic of the next meeting. Please plan on coming and presenting your testimony, concerns. It could be that the system works great, and we need to hear that as well as if there are complaints. So let's plan on having that dialogue at the next meeting. I don't know how long that meeting will go. It could go as long as an hour. It could go as long as 2 hours. But I do want to take a deep dive into the subject area. And so with that, I think it would be helpful, Brian, if we plan on having someone. I know that there is DOR has a training process for training assessors. And so unless there's objection from the committee, I think that it would be helpful at that meeting to have a representative from DOR do a walkthrough of that assessment and evaluation process with us, and see if they can make a short 20 to 30 minute maximum presentation on that process, and also to provide information in advance of the meeting for us to peruse before we come in, so that we'll be educated to a great extent and have meaningful questions. And then after that initial presentation, we'll take in information, and we'll have a back and forth with DOR about that information, and we'll have taken information from tax assessors across the state. So those of you who are members of the Tax Assessors Association, if you could, I think it would be helpful for you to prepare a presentation as well to the committee to talk about the assessment process, those things that you think that are changes that would be helpful at your local level, and any adjustments that you see we want to hear about. Other comments?
Well, I was just going to add to that. I think it's important to hear from the Assessors Association, and I'd also like to hear from a representation of the county commissioners about the funding issues and what are the barriers to their ability to comply with whatever it is the manual says or we come up with. We get that perspective too.
I see that Mr. Ramsey is here from ACCG, so I know that he is taking notes, and hopefully they will be prepared to address Ms. Gardner's questions concerning that, along with GMA, because there are some cities that provide, that do their own assessments as well. So I think that's important for GMA to tap into those resources. Other comments from committee members?
I do have one comment.
Yes. Representative Beskin.
I'd like to hear, I don't know whether it would be a county commissioner thing or an assessor thing, but last year when we were having some Fulton County delegation meetings, we found a place on the county commissioner's website that said the county commissioners, the Fulton County commissioners, would like to look into whether I think it was called a special system of assessment that is used in Old Fourth Ward would be appropriate in other areas. So I would like to know what that special process is for Fulton County, whether other counties have a special process like that. I think from talking to county representatives after the meeting concluded, it was thought that that was a method that was used to address the gentrification that Chairman Gardner mentioned earlier, which is to try to give some relief to what are called legacy residents who've lived in an area for a long, long time. But is there a way, and does it have to be within a county, to have something that is either neighborhood specific or there is assessment for what's called a transitional developing area, whatever that is? Is there something being done now to try to grant relief to homeowners in certain places within a county? What are those, and are they being uniformly applied?
Okay. Mr. Ramsey, is that something that you might be able to delve into? I know that Mr. Ramsey was lead counsel, was the interim counsel, and then I think appointed counsel for Fulton County. And you may have some knowledge of that already. They may want to. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Other comments from? Yes. Representative Carson.
Andy, at the end of 4 meetings or 5 meetings, what do you, I understand the goals, I think. The goals is to look, one, at the assessment process and provide analysis as well as suggestions for improvement, adjustments, what have you. Second would be the exemptions that would have already been mentioned. And I know that's very sensitive in Fulton County and DeKalb County. It's sensitive in my county as well. What do you see as far as an end product? Do you see some legislation? Do you see recommended DOR regulations to be changed? What do you see as an end product in regard to this? Obviously, for something as with so many details as this subject, we're going to have some sort of committee report. But I'm wondering, what is the end, not just the end product, but the end goal?
Good question. Thank you, Representative Carson. So let me go back to the statement you made. I think the points of emphasis will be on the assessment evaluation, and then the secondary, the appeal process. Exemptions, if we can touch on those, we will try to, but I don't think we're going to have time to get to the exemption issues. I think that Representative Gardner was saying that Fulton County is looking into that issue locally,
Okay.
and that from their analysis, that may be helpful for this committee to examine maybe next summer. As a special study committee set up again for
So
next year.
assessment and appeals, not assessment and exemptions.
That's right.
Okay.
I don't think we could tackle the exemptions.
I agree.
So, but now to your question, the I don't want to predetermine that legislation is needed, because I don't know that it is. I have a hunch that there may be some small tweaks that may need to be made. I'm hearing emphasis from members that there are areas that need to be addressed statutorily. Just the sheer oversight of a board of assessors is a question that needs an answer to. Whether or not that oversight is meaningful and is being enforced may require some legislation, just as an example. But I don't know that, I don't want to predetermine that legislation is required. What I'd like to do is take in this information and get your comments and feedback from professionals in the area, from taxpayers themselves, take in the learned wisdom of this committee, and then from that point, in our recommendation, if we do decide that there are elements of the statutes that need to be revised, we'll make those asserted recommendations. And then it would be my intent, assuming, and that would be a presumption on my part, that legislation is needed or regulations are needed to be revised, then I would want this committee to work on that legislation. If it requires a secondary meeting of this ad hoc meeting during session to finalize some legislation that we can present from this committee, then I think that would be appropriate. But let's take in the information first and see where that drives the discussion, and then see what solutions arise. It's a good question, and so I don't have a legislative goal in mind. I'm going to let this process kind of lead us in a direction. Any other comments, questions? Good. All right, well, I think we've covered, at this time we have an opening for public comment. I talked about the committee goals. We've introduced the members and welcomed everyone. Is there anyone that at this time that would like to speak to the committee, introduce themselves, let us know that they are hopefully going to be participating on a regular basis in the committee hearings? If you'd like to take that time to do that now, the committee would love to hear from you, even if it's just an introduction. We are certainly welcome to that at this point in time. So we'll open up for public comments. We have a room that is, I guess it probably has 35 chairs in it. Looks like we're about half full. And I'm noticing that no one is coming to the microphone. We have a taker from GMA. So if you'll get the corner mic there, witness two. So I'm going to encourage that folks participate. This is, if you're going to come, you may just be called upon. So I'm going to encourage you to participate. I'm going to encourage you to be a part of the process and give comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Joel Wiggins with GMA, and I wanted to introduce myself to the committee. Thank you for calling the committee, and let you know that we're going to be a resource to you guys. We're happy to participate, and we do have several cities that assess their own properties. It's not a great number, but we will certainly reach out to them and try to get something together for the next meeting. I did kind of want to point out that this is something that we applaud being looked at. Property taxes account for about 27.2% of general fund revenues for cities across the state. And as Georgia tax law is structured, there's only a few sources that can go toward general fund revenues or services. And services that are included in that are probably most applicable to property value, such as police, fire, and other things that protect property value. So we're excited to participate, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Wiggins. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Steve Swindell, and I'm with the Georgia Association of Assessing Officials. I'm the Chief Appraiser of Cherokee County and serve as the Legislative Liaison or Director of Legislative Affairs. They've got a couple of different names in the organization for what I do, but primarily I'm just a resource for y'all. We make ourselves available during the session to come down and answer any questions about the assessment process and the anything regarding tax assessment in the state. And I will be available to this committee for the same purposes. Anything and everything I can do for you, I'd be glad to do. We'll have a few other members that will be available to you as well as the process unfolds. But I appreciate the opportunity to serve you in this way. And by all means, any questions you all have, please don't hesitate to ask.
Mr. Swindell, to what extent are hearing officers also a member of your organization?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They're not.
Okay.
Hearing officers are, that process is where appeals funnel to. So as in Board of Equalization, hearing officer, arbitration, those are all ways to settle appeals where we'll be a party on one side and the taxpayer will be on the other side.
And then, and to what extent are you required in terms of your certifications and licensings to be an appraiser?
With the assessor's office?
Yes.
In my own case, for Cherokee County, because of parcel count and size of the county, the chief appraiser is required to be an appraiser 4, which is the highest certification level that the Department of Revenue offers. There are, of course, 3 other certification levels below a 4, and each level takes a required amount of education and experience to achieve those next levels.
Good, good. This is going to be kind of the dialogue that we're going to have, because
Sure.
I want you to peel back the layers, and I think it's important for the public to know that assessors, county assessors, do have to go through training. They have to go through experience. They're ranked, so you have levels of certification that are required. I don't think that the public is familiar with that, so that's another thing I think is important for folks to know. We have questions that have lit up, which is always good, Steve, so thank you.
Sure.
Representative Beskin.
Thank you. Mr. Swindell, I think I recall earlier this year getting a handout or a send-out from your organization, GAAO, of a set of principles that your group would like to be adhered to or followed statewide. Was that your group, or am I confusing that with someone else?
We have a legislative policy statement that we
That,
create each year. It's just a single sheet, maybe 4 or 5 points that we like to address. Yes.
right. I think something on there had to do with homestead exemptions, which we're not talking about. But is it possible, Mr. Chairman, that we could get at the next meeting or so what your current principles of your organization are?
Yes, as a matter of fact, next week we're meeting with that committee to outline the 19 legislative priorities. There's a few
okay.
issues on there that I think we're going to remove from the statement because we're just not prepared. We've had them on there for a long time and we're not prepared to deal with them, frankly. But there's a statement in there about creating a property exemption application form for exempt properties, churches and those types of things, a statewide, form that we could all use to help make that process more uniform across the entire 159 counties. But that's the only thing I think that's in there for regarding exemptions right now.
Okay.
Good
thank you.
question. And I think the for the next meeting, I think it would be helpful to have, if you could, to look over your policy agenda as it pertains to valuations and assessments. And to the extent that you can, be helpful for you to provide a short white paper, a brief explanation of the assessors and the appraisal process, and then any issues that you're seeing as an organization.
Sure.
Okay, good.
Do we know what the time frame is? Do you plan on being done by the end of the year?
Yes.
That type of thing? Okay.
Mhm.
Like I
Well,
said, we're meeting next
done in
week.
terms of as much as we can do for this
Right.
calendar. Yes.
I'm just trying to anticipate this next meeting.
We'll-
Is it next week or is it?
We'll send out a notice
Okay.
of that. We're going to make sure that the committee members, as many of the committee members can attend, and then we'll send out a notice of that date.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And then Representative Gardner.
I just had a follow-up. I'm basically in assessment 101 still, so is the level of the appraiser determined by each county? Or who is it?
Well, appraisers are encouraged, at least in my home county, they're encouraged to get as much schooling, training, and certifications as they can. Most counties have some type of criteria where you must be certified in a particular level before you can hold this position, whatever that may be, managerial, upper levels. But, in Cherokee, we encourage our folks to get as educated as the budget will allow,
So who determines the bottom line, though? Does the county decide? or-
It's in the law that, you know, so many of each appraiser level must be present in counties of varying size. It's broken out by size in
By
the law.
size. So
Yeah.
a county with 5 or 10,000 people has a different
Right,
level. of-
like an appraiser 3 may be the only requirement for a chief appraiser in a smaller county, but, and I don't, it's like 40,000 parcels, I think, and above, you've gotta be an appraiser 4.
Okay. That helps me, thank you.
Good, thank you, Representative. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Swindell, for introducing yourself to us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Larry Ramsey with Association County Commissioners of Georgia. I had not planned to speak. You know how lawyers are once you get them in front of a microphone, but I'll keep this short. I look forward to working with the committee to try to answer questions from the county's perspective. Similar to what Joel from GMA said, actually for counties, property taxes are our single largest source of revenue to provide services to our citizens, and so obviously this is a significant issue from a county perspective. I know we won't be talking about exemptions. I think one of the things that may become relevant as the committee moves forward is not just statutory issues, but constitutional ones, and that may be a more of a bite to break off than this committee would want to chew. But I think one of the issues that I've seen over time is that when it comes to perceived fairness of the property tax system, we start from the constitutional provision that says that all taxation will be uniform. But over the years, many exceptions to that have been added into the Constitution. So we have a lot of different rules for different types of property: forest land, conservation use land, standing timber, and on, various vehicle provisions. So to the extent that's relevant, that'll be something I'll be willing and able to address as the committee moves forward, but happy to answer any questions and look forward to working with the committee.
Ms. Ramsey, I think it would be helpful also at the next meeting, if you would, talk a little bit about the appointment process relevant to Board of Assessors from the Board of Commissioners. So you heard the oversight question that was raised, the accountability question that was raised. I think that would be helpful if you could delve into that and help educate the committee on that oversight in that appointment process.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Ramsey?
Thank
Good, thank you. And then, of course, you heard the fourth ward issue.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman,
Good morning.
Roger Land. I'm an attorney in Atlanta, and we represent taxpayers. So our view is a little bit different, obviously, from the ACCG and the GMA and GAAO. I am a member of GAAO. I've been to a lot of their facilities in the various counties. We've probably litigated or administratively participated in appeals in over 60 counties. We have active litigation going, including class actions now in Fulton County. And my perspective from the taxpayer standpoint is, first off, you start off with the Constitution. All tangible property will be assessed uniformly. But other than those 5 or 6 elements that are in the Constitution, we are operating, I think Larry mentioned, constitutionally. We have a constitutional crisis. In the Heron Lakes case, the Supreme Court clearly ruled the legislature cannot set classes of property. So while we sit around and we talk about classes of property, something's got to be done or it's going to wind up in the Supreme Court again. So that's one issue. The second issue is when you go back to the matters that will be before us in assessment, is you have to start off with training. Who are the trainers? What's their authority? Who are the students? I've been to hearing officer training classes. I've been to BOE training classes just to monitor what's being taught. We don't have a good class of student, so let's don't blame the trainers for everything. Once we get beyond that, then you get into the appointment process with the county commissioners appointing the assessors. That should be a break, but it's not. Some counties, especially rural counties, are still county commissioners trying to influence the assessors to make specific decisions. So accountability needs to be inquired into. The other thing is the fairness of the assessment. Unfortunately, in Georgia, we're left with the county unit system to extent with home rule. We got 159 decision makers with 159 different opinions. Then on top of that is when that chief appraiser in a rural county, because we got many counties less than 5,000 people and some of them less than 10,000. So that staff person calls the Department of Revenue and say, what do I do in this matter? They get an oral opinion. It's not done by a lawyer. It's not done by the Attorney General. It's not enforceable. It's not decipherable. But that is sort of how the system is bogging down now, is the Department of Revenue, with their hands tied, maybe doesn't have the right to issue opinions that the whole state can follow. So my interest in the assessed value area that'll be the next item on this committee's topic is that somehow we get uniformity of appraisal values. And I don't know how to we get that.
Now, Mr. Land, thank you for being here today. The uniformity principle, though, applies to each of the local government divisions, so it is uniformity relative to the taxing jurisdiction. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
So the reason why we have 159 different opinions is because there are 159 different taxing jurisdictions, and each one has its own unique qualities. At least we presume that it does constitutionally. Is that fair?
That's fair, but theoretically they're governed by the statutes and the Georgia Appraisal Procedure Manual.
Yes, that's true.
The problem comes in the interpretation of those documents and the Constitution, of course.
So in terms of application of the law and the appraisal manual, that needs to be that should be uniform across the state. It should be, the opinions should be applied across the state in a uniform manner. As to the actual determination of value, I think that we would agree that it would need to be determined by that local appraisal or assessment body.
Either that or we get to regionalism. As you may know, we have passed legislation in the past where, for instance, you can have a regional board of equalization, because some counties have a lot of trouble finding qualified and trained people in order to even have a board of equalization. So that's number one. Number two, the legislature also passed that with an intergovernmental contract, these counties could band together and hire specialized employees like a forester.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, none of that has been done, even though the legislation is there.
And do you appear before boards of equalization?
Yes.
And what has been your experience with boards of equalization?
Some counties, they have good ones. Some counties, they're three people asleep drawing their $75 a day or $25 a day, whatever the county's paying them. But there again, that goes back to once you get the 40 hours training for a BOE member and the 8 hours of continuing education, there's really nothing that can be done other than grand jury. Fortunately, now they can remove a recalcitrant member. But let's take it really not, if we could break it down into two parts, commercial and residential. Commercial works pretty well because most of that will go through a hearing officer, some of it will go through a BOE. But the residential appeals is the one that bears the burden in the state of 159 different board of equalizations and their training and their demeanor and what they do. Most of them, in a lot of counties, will just go along with whatever the staff appraiser says. This is what it is, and they say, fine. You don't like it, appeal it to Superior Court.
All right, well, good. We'll appreciate any questions from members of the committee. Mr. Land, if you feel comfortable, your insights on the assessment and valuation process will be helpful. So we hope to see you at the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other members from the audience that would like to speak? Oh, yes, that's right. Go ahead,
Based
Judge.
on what he just said, it dawned on me, do we have somebody for the committee that's gonna help gather information for us? Because if so, if there if there are other states that have appraisal manuals like we get from our Department of Revenue, could we see what other states are doing, how they've dealt with these very same things and compare ours to theirs, so maybe we don't have to discover the wheel on everything. Maybe somebody else has done a lot of the work for us.
That's a great point, and obviously a seasoned veteran of the General Assembly raises those kind of questions. Brian Groom is going to be putting that stuff together. Ms. Pamela will be helping to coordinate the meetings and their scheduling. So if you need anything in that regard, logistic-wise, please coordinate with Ms. Pamela Lewis. Ms. Pamela, would you just stand up, let everybody see you for just a minute, in case you haven't met Ms. Pamela? She will be helping with the logistics of the committee. Brian's going to help with a lot of the internal research. Blake, where's Blake? Blake is our legal counsel. He will be helping us with any legal research that needs to be done. So if you would, you feel free to direct those thoughts or concerns to them directly, but if you wouldn't mind copying me or the other members on them, that way everyone will know, so we don't duplicate work. Brian has already done some of that research with respect to other states, at least with respect to the process of appeal. Brian, I don't know if you want to comment on whether you looked at the assessment and valuation process of other states. I know they looked at some of our surrounding states. You want to comment on that?
Just in doing the research on appeals, I've come across the manuals, so they do have them. So we'll be able to pull it together and look at those.
Just 2 or 3, not 49 other
Yeah.
ones, but something representative.
Focused on the surrounding states for the most part.
Maybe the most currently updated ones or something.
Okay.
Any models? That's a good question, Representative Gardner. I will look into it and see if there are any national models. I don't know that there would be, but we'll look into that and see if there is. But I think it's important to look at our surrounding states, and Brian has been looking at South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama and Florida, just to name those few. I don't think he's touching North Carolina, but those few, actually you have looked at North Carolina. So those surrounding states I think will be worth an examination. And then I think to your point, looking at the most recent revised one may have some additional nuances that have changed just because of advancements that may have been made in the process. So that would be good. Yes.
I just want to point out, just for the committee's sake,
Can you pull that over?
I think the former majority leader brings out a great point about competitiveness and not reinventing the wheel. But in regard to Florida, they are more reliant on personal property taxation, much more so than we are, and their local governments and so forth. So I just want to take that into consideration. Mm-hmm. That might be more of an outlier. They may have best practices, they may have terrible. But I would think, based on our tax structure, that South Carolina, Alabama, and North Carolina would be more comparable. Tennessee, to a certain extent, more so than Florida. That's just my feedback.
Good. Thank you, John.
One point also in trying to find a good go-by for another state. I think we should also try to think of the most analogous state to ours in a situation where about half of our population is concentrated here in the metro Atlanta area in a few big counties. We've heard about counties with less than 5,000 people, but we have a few counties with 1 million or more than 1 million. So I do think let's try to come up with a state that has those same characteristics and such a big divide between metro counties and then rural counties with a lot of property being taxed, like the timber we've been talking about.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Beskin. All right, other members of the public would like to speak. Please join us.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Mitchell Graham. I actually work with Roger, and so I don't have much to add. What I would just hope that you keep in mind when the conversation turns to accountability, you'll hear from the Department of Revenue and from others that there are a lot of mechanisms that are supposed to make sure that the end product, which is the assessments, that they are uniform and at fair market value at the back end of the process. One of those is the appeal process is a check. The Department of Revenue conducts their studies. There's the Department of Audits and Accounts conducts a study. But prior to the assessment, there is not really any kind of independent overview. And what you find in many cases is that the appraisal staff that conducts all the work, they submit their findings to the Board of Assessors, and the Board of Assessors doesn't have the independent expertise to actually take a look at what went into forming these assessments, because you can have the best appraisal manuals, you can have the best laws, but if there's no mechanism to make sure those are followed before these values are actually formed, then there are just ways, they'll find ways to work around it. And most appraisal staff, I think they do their job in good faith, but it'd just be nice to have an independent voice on the front end. Thank you.
Thank you. Other excuse me, other comments? Okay, seeing, excuse me, I don't know what happened. I just got allergy. I'm allergic to Richard Graham, I guess. Sorry. Just kidding. Okay, well, with that, we'll any final comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, what we'll do is we will adjourn our meeting today and get set up for the next meeting. Now we have some direction and some assistance from members of the public and from DOR. And so we'll set that next meeting up and we'll start tackling the assessment evaluation process. So thank you for being here.